There's a popular saying that blood is thicker than water. But did you know there's actually another rendition of that saying that some people interpret, which is actually that the blood of the covenant is thicker than the water of the womb? A phrase that seems surprisingly fitting for this movie. Welcome to my spoiler review for Evil Dead Burn, a movie I was very excited about, and a movie that has proved to have a slightly divisive reaction, at least online on my Twitter page. It seems like there's, a very big debate out there at the moment as to whether this is perhaps too bleak, too brutal, too this or that, and we'll touch on that throughout this review. But first, I want to explain why I went with that saying to open this review. So, essentially, the saying says that the relationships we choose to form can be as strong, if not stronger, than the relationships of those we are born into by blood, right? So, for example, I think a good analogy for that, oftentimes with the LGBT community, is they find themselves often saying they choose their family because obviously sometimes they have issues with their family, etc., and they often find a real sense of belonging with that new family that they find. But Evil Dead Burn, instead of showing the goodness of that, it takes the other route, and it shows you just how destructive and, sabotaging these relationships can be, whether they're blood or not. It doesn't matter how you formed the relationship. Any relationship has the potential to be destructive. And that's what I think this movie was really trying to hammer down on with the message. And I do think that perhaps, apart from some other themes, of course, including various other things which we will discuss, but I do think that's a big part of why a lot of people find this movie to be so bleak, so dark, and maybe not to their taste, which is fair. I think it's a fair criticism. But I just wanted to put that out there so that you can see where I'm coming from when we go through this review of this movie that I really enjoyed, surprisingly, because I am sensitive to horror. I have limits with horror, oftentimes with animals and with children. Both of those things, as we'll discuss, occur in this movie, but I do think it's all about the way it's done and the context of which it's done. And as we'll discuss, it didn't offend me or make me think, oh, this is just the worst thing in the world, right? It for me, it worked with the film, but we'll discuss why later. So, obviously, another big criticism of this film, apart from it just being too bleak, is that it can be a bit mean-spirited, which it is. It's a mean-spirited film. And usually, like I said, I'm not particularly a big fan of those types of movies. Under certain conditions, let's discuss them. So for me, when it comes to a mean-spirited film or a depressing film, a dark, disturbing film, there are a few things I look for to decide whether I feel like it's being shocking for the sake of shocking, or whether there's actually something else it's trying to do alongside that. So there's a few things I look for. One of them is there a purpose for it, right? So, is there a reason they've gone as far as they go? Does it really propel the plot forward in a way like, for example, Charlie's death in Hereditary does, right? It's a child dying, it's a horrific scene, and it's, for the most part, one of the scenes that people remember the most. But I think it was handled in a good way, and it was a very important plot device. So I think that it was unavoidable, right? It had a purpose. I do feel that Evil Dead Burn had a purpose in its brutality of doing things, and we'll discuss in a bit more detail why throughout the sections of the review. But for the most part, I do just want to emphasize that, in my opinion, it's okay to be bleak, disturbing, depressing, as long as there is a purpose behind it. Like also Obsession, for example, or even Backrooms, two very big horror hits this year. They don't have happy endings. They're very bleak, but I think they have that sort of vibe about them where it's it they seem to be a lot more forgiven for being so bleak than Evil Dead, and perhaps it's something to do with the craft behind them. You know, they're viewed as, I think naturally you would view Obsession or even Backrooms as slightly higher intellect, right, than Evil Dead. But at the same time, I do feel like at this point, after Evil Dead 2013 and Rise, and knowing this is kind of a continuation of that era, you should know roughly what you're in for at this point, right? And it has become sort of a horror endurance test. And I think to some people that's really appealing, but to others it's perhaps not. So, where do I fall into this camp, right? Because, like I said, to me there's a fine line between just being disturbing or gory for the sake of shocking people and actually having a purpose. Like, here's an unpopular take from me, I guess, for something that lots of people find to be meaningless. I don't want to say the actual full phrase, but, you know, TP, I guess we'll call it. Terrifier. But I actually like the Terrifier films, but to me, the purpose of the gore and stuff in Terrifier isn't just to be shocking, it's also, to me, a display of practical effects, like a practical effects showcase each set piece, particularly Terrifier 2, right? Because they do so much of it with actual prosthetics and all these sort of things, which is what I find really interesting, which is why I can get over the gore in that. Also, just for honesty, they fixed it in Terrifier 3 a bit, but Terrifier 2 in particular, it's very gory, but it also, you can tell it's fake. Like, you know, there's like that infamous scene in the bedroom, you can tell, as disturbing as it is and horrifying, it doesn't look real, right? You're like, why does the blood look pink? But Evil Dead does not have that. This movie looks quite realistic with some of its injuries, and less realistic in others. But hey. So personally, I will say that for me, Evil Dead Burn met my criteria to get a pass for its meanness. Also, I do have to say, I do kind of feel like people might be overstating how mean it is. Like, it is mean. It's depressing, it's bleak, it's brutal, but there is some comedic elements throughout. There's really good action. Not action set pieces, but you know what I mean. Really good horror set pieces, chase scenes. There's a lot, performances, there's a lot to really appreciate within this movie. So it's kind of unfortunate to me that a lot of people's takeaway from it has just been, oh, it's mean, right? So we're going to discuss that. And to be honest, I do think there is actually some optimism in the movie. Like, it's not completely bleak, right? I mean, at least by Evil Dead standards. By Evil Dead standards, it's a decently happy ending in the, you know, the main character, Thea, of course, this is a spoiler review, survives, which is the same for both of the last Evil Dead movies, Rise and, well, I guess that depends on if you view Alice as the main character of Evil Dead Rise or not. I wouldn't. I'd say she's one of the main characters, but I don't think she's the main character to me in that movie. But she is the standout. And we'll talk about her, don't you worry, we'll talk about the post-credit scenes. But, you know, she does ultimately survive this ordeal. She destroys her obstacle, her mental and physical obstacle, by stabbing Will with the dagger and crushing his head, you know. And we now have a weapon in play that in the last 2 Evil Dead movies was not properly in play, that can officially properly kill Deadites, I think. Like I said, we're going to talk about the post-credit scenes, because there are questions. But for the most part, it seems like, you know, the dagger is a nice thing to have, for the humans at least. So yeah, gore aside, I also do feel like there wasn't particularly much here that I was like, oh god, this is just awful, how could a horror movie do this? Because it's a horror movie. There is the post-credit scene, and I will say, the biggest problem I reckon people have is in the dinner scene, which we will discuss what happens in it, but if you're watching this review, you've probably seen the movie and you know what I'm talking about. People are always very sensitive to animals being hurt in films, and children, and it happens in this movie, but we'll discuss it, because it didn't. I'm surprised that it didn't fully disturb me in the way it usually would, because usually I'd be like, I don't like this movie now. But like I said, I feel like it worked in the grand scheme of things. So, how are we going to discuss this movie? Because there's a lot I want to discuss. So what we're going to do first is we're going to talk about my favourite 3 set pieces. So I picked 3 set pieces, sort of moments throughout the film that were my personal favourite. I was taking notes throughout the film. I've got a whole notebook full of them. It was great. And then after we've talked about the 3 top set pieces, we'll touch on characters and plot points and things like that. And we'll talk about the post-credit scenes towards the end, and then we'll give my overall thoughts, my score for the film, and I'll take the conversation over to you guys. Okay, my third favourite sequence from this film was the opening / title card misdirect. This was very clever to me. I enjoyed this. So, of course, we open the movie with Joeseph playing the tapes he's found from his grandfather, which are also, of course, I'm sure everyone caught, but if you didn't, they're the same tapes in Evil Dead Rise. And, of course, Bruce Campbell voices the priest on the tapes, which is always a nice touch. I love Bruce Campbell. I hope they do bring him back eventually. I'm sure they will. People love Bruce Campbell. So yes, this is obviously continuing the story in away from Evil Dead Rise. Like, all the movies are connected, as has been said, but, you know, they never go too outright in the connection until the end of this film. So the reason I liked this opening and misdirect so much is because it did genuinely get me. I was genuinely thinking there wasn't going to be a title card after the original 2 friends on the boat died, right? I was like, oh, are we really not doing a title card this time? And I was going to hold that against the movie. I was going to be like, you can't do an Evil Dead movie at this point and not have a dope title card. But they came back. Did you think they were going to skip the title card? I would be interested to know if you were also in that camp. You were like, oh, where's the title card? So, talking about the 2 friends and on the boat, I've seen some people say they don't quite get the purpose of that scene, apart from seeing that Jessica, it was Jessica, wasn't it? I think it was her name, Jess or Jessica. Yeah, Jessica, from the Evil Dead Rise. Obviously, the beginning bit and the end is in, you know, the full circle moment. And I also think the purpose of this scene is it was kind of setting up some of the themes throughout the movie. Not necessarily the domestic violence theme outright, but it was certainly setting up that theme of relationships, relationship struggles, controlling, friends versus lovers versus families, that theme. I felt that was one of the purposes of the scene, other than just being pretty cool. And having some gnarly visuals, right? So the fish hooks, this was a really good use of the environment to me. I've always really appreciated the Evil Dead movies for their use of the environments they're in. Like, they tend to utilize them quite well. And we'll actually talk about that more later. But I liked, for example, there was the visual after he was going out to try and save his friend, where we see the Deadite Jessica's fingers go over the boat and then tip it over, and I was like, that's an Evil Dead visual. It was cool. I almost half expected a sort of swim chase to ensue, like we'd see the Deadite crazily swimming or something, but she instead of chasing him through the water, she boils the water, and this was awesome. And this is the first time I think that the movie was establishing that the Deadites now are much more powerful than they've ever been. Of course, I can't remember exactly what it was, but there was some sort of thing that happened in Evil Dead Rise that sort of led to the evil being released. I know from what I remember with an interview with the director, they did, Lee Cronin, I think he did confirm that it was the 3rd previously unseen Book of the Dead. That's what I'm calling it. I know there's like so many different names for it, but that's mainly due to rights issues, right? So I'm calling it the Book of the Dead. But there's 3 versions of the Book of the Dead, and in Evil Dead Rise, it was supposedly the 3rd, previously unseen version, and I guess the most powerful. So yeah, the Deadites in this movie are very powerful. And she boils the water, and then when you expect the title card, and this is why I thought it was clever because it did get me. Like you would have expected something from there to happen, but instead we cut to meeting our actual cast. Well, some of the cast. And I did think, oh, are we not doing the title card? Although then, as it was going on, I was like, well, maybe it's just going to be later in the film, right? But yeah, so we meet our main cast, and I do have to say, at first, I don't think any of them are very likable. And I don't know if that's a deliberate choice, because, you know, there is a certain degree of, I think they've deliberately tried to make most of these characters a moral grey area, except for the main character of Thya. But it was an interesting choice. And you notice straight away of course, Thya's boyfriend, Will, is clearly abusing her. Like, I don't know if everyone would have caught that straight away, but I certainly caught it straight away. From the way they were talking to each other and the acting, you know, you could tell at the very least there was not a good relationship there. And then he got into his car after an argument, and that's when it clicked for me, because, of course, previously, right before we cut to our characters, we see Jessica get hit by a car. So that's when it clicked for me, and I was like, this is going to go into the title card. And that's when I was like, okay, you got me. I'm on board. I'm on board with this. And it was great. So he crashes into her, and the car flips, and I believe, I am going to be honest, it was a little bit blurry. This was an endurance test of horror, like I said. But I do think it was this scene in which we see the Deadite in the corner of the car, just like sort of smiling at him and being creepy, and that was an incredible visual. I was like, oh my gosh. And it also, it kind of reminded me, this is a very specific reference, but it reminded me of that sort of snaky, weird thing in Doctor Who's, I can't remember what season, maybe 11 or something, or it was Doctor Number 11. It was Matt Smith. It was his first episode with Karen Gillan's Amy Pond, and there's this thing in her house, and it kind of reminded me of that. It's like, And that thing always creeped me out a little bit when I used to watch it, so I liked that. That was a good touch. And she burns the car, right? She burns him alive, which of course comes back later, but also makes way for our title card and the title of our movie, Evil Dead Burn. I loved this opening. I thought it was a really clever misdirect. I do still think both the first... Yeah, I do think Evil Dead 2013 and Evil Dead Rise did have better openings. Evil Dead Rise is possibly one of my favourite opening scenes ever. Like, top 5 horror movie favourite opening scenes, genuinely. I really love the opening for that movie, because it was such a, oh, we're on 11, right, moment. Whereas this more started at a 1, went to an 11, went back down to like a 3, and then went back up. So it was a roller coaster of a ride to the title. My second favourite sequence in this movie was the dinner / car scene. So I'm classing it as one big set piece because that's kind of what it was, and you're going to see I have to do this a little bit for our next one. But I do feel like, for the most part, they are very intertwined scenes, right? They are literally one after the other, and for a reason. So, like I said earlier, this dinner scene in particular, from what I've seen, is one of the main things that put people off of this film. And I can see why, so let's talk about it. So, before this scene, for some context, Thya, because Edgar, who we will talk about later, has already been possessed by a Deadite at this point, by the time we're here. And Thya actually saw Edgar, well, Deadite Edgar, I guess, trying to mutilate himself. But, of course, to Thya and everyone, because he's so depressed of losing his son, it probably just looked like he was trying to harm himself. And the tension really escalates throughout the dinner as, sort of little conflicts start popping up. Susan, the mother, is asking Thya about if she's planning to continue the business that her and her boyfriend had together, which we later find out, of course, she was being abused by him. And not only that, a quite horrific incident happened involving the two of them with some boiling water in that very restaurant. And I thought the tension really worked here. It was really building that vibe of just something is coming and you knew it was coming, but you were just waiting for it. And of course, it kept alluding to that because Thea, when they're at the dinner table, is trying to, take away the knife from Edgar, which I thought was a great choice. I was like, okay. But I found it interesting. I know he asked her not to tell anyone, but it would I guess you wouldn't, in the sense of you understand that they're just grieving, and maybe particularly for Thea in this circumstance, she doesn't want to stir the pot anymore, right? But I don't know. That was interesting that she didn't. I would have at least, kept a closer eye on him, because it's when they're not properly looking at him that he starts fully getting taken over. The dog's winding him up, right, and he stabs the dog. And this is where I think people were like, oh, I don't like this film. And it's understandable. Like I said, people are very, very sensitive to animals being injured and stuff in films. But I will say, for me personally, we don't really see it, right, like properly. We see him stabbing Fur, but to me, it very clearly looked like someone just stabbing, like, almost like a picture frame with some fur material put onto it. We hear the dog whimpering, but and then we do see a shot of it later, but we don't really see the dog getting, like, killed properly up close and viciously. And that is the escalation of the scene. It's the breaking point where they take Edgar to, or attempt to take him to the hospital, things like that. Obviously the fight ensues. It was a really great scene. But then the cherry on top of this, for me, was the car scene that followed. And this is why I'm classing it as one set piece, because they do kind of really rely on each other, and it's one sort of big moment in the movie. It's the big sort of crescendo point of the middle of the movie where everything starts kicking off again. So in the car ride, first of all, we finally see Joeseph being an absolute coward, and we start to get a sense of how unwilling he is to actually step up to the plate, right? But then also, for me, the camera work in this scene was just incredible, and the visuals, but all of it was just incredible. So in particular, it was when they got the fire extinguisher, right? And the car was filled with all this white smoke. I can't tell if it was ash or snow, I can't quite remember outside, but that was cool. There was just some really cool visuals out there. It was a great scene, and it was very creative. It sort of seemed like I said, Evil Dead has a pretty good habit of making full, or at least really optimal use of the environments around the characters to bring into the set piece, and I think they did that in the car with things like the seatbelt and then the headrest. And this made me laugh because I have always thought in my head of, if a car ever crashes, what would I use to get out? And I've always thought, take off the headrest. Or some cars, I think they used to, I don't know if they do anymore because most are automatic, but gear sticks in some cars, or the handbrakes, used to be removable, so you could use it as a window. I don't know what the word is, I don't drive. Yeah, I liked that, and I thought the use of the headrest was creative. It was gnarly. Of course, that's also the scene you've seen from the trailers where she has her fingers caught in the door. Didn't actually make as much of an impact in the film as it did in the trailer to me, though. But maybe it's because they did show that particular part of the trailer, and the film, in trailers quite a lot. So maybe it just sort of, nullified it a bit. But overall, really, 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 really loved it. I loved that scene so much. I thought it was really well done, and I think it did a really good job of setting up the stakes, and it plants the seeds of Joeseph being a coward, like I said, and not being able to do what he needs to do to protect his chosen family, right? Because even though he's very clearly in love with Thea, Alice at the time is his girlfriend, or wife. I think girlfriend. I can't remember. I'm pretty sure it said girlfriend. And yeah, he doesn't kill his dad to save her, and it is ultimately his fault that she dies, because he could have shot his dad. Obviously, we find out later on that would have been a bit useless, but it maybe would have deterred him long enough for them to get away. he didn't really do anything to prevent her death in that moment. And I do think that's one of the main reasons Alice in particular comes back so viciously later on, because I think she, rightfully so, she probably didn't even need the Deadites to convince her to do that. She's like, hell, let me take over for that bit. I will kill him. Although, of course, it doesn't quite go to plan. So then, my favourite part of the film, hands down, the entire house chase sequence with Alice that I was just talking about. Now, this is a long one. I feel like this is like probably makes up a good 10 to 15 minutes of the movie, but it was so worth it. And of course, this is also, speaking of the trailers, in one of the teasers or something, you know, we saw the long tracking shot of Thea crawling across the floor while all the chaos is going around her. That's this scene. Even better in context of the film, in my opinion. I loved it. And it was genuinely crazy. Here's the thing. This is what I say when people, you know, comedy is very subjective, but also part of Evil Dead at this point, I think, is trying to find comedy in the absolute just absurdity of what's going on, right? Like, how has stuff gotten this crazy, right? And that was sort of why I sort of let out a little chuckle during it, like, not in a bad way, but just like, what is happening, right? Like, this has just gone so off the rails, as Evil Dead does. But it was just such a brilliant set piece. The camera work, again, was just so incredible. I'm in awe of the camera work in this film, honestly. I think I was going to bring him up later, but I just want to give him, I'm going to double check his name because I want to give the director another shout out because he just did such a good job. Oh gosh. Maybe I should have looked up how to say his name before this. So I'll just call him Sebastian. But his directing is so good in this film. Honestly, he is incredible. Philip Lozano, the cinematographer, also incredible job. So Sebastian and Philip, hands down, and the cast did an incredible job, as we'll discuss. But you know, I don't think I would have liked this movie anywhere near as much if they weren't the ones involved in making it, because I think what they've done with it really worked, personally. So yeah, love that. Great performance, by the way, from Sojella. Oh my god, these names. As Alice. Alice is, of course, the mother, and she gets to do quite a lot in this scene. You know, a lot is relied upon her to sell certain things in this movie. There are some problems, particularly in this sequence, which we'll talk about later on in the parts of the movie that I didn't quite enjoy as much. But for the most part, she does a lot in this bit in terms of carrying the plot forward, right? And also, we'll talk about it again later, but Thea is way nicer to her than she should ever have been, honestly, especially by this point. And then, of course, she ultimately is kind of the reason it goes so off the rails, because she does let Edgar back in. Which is a crazy decision. Why did she choose to do? I guess they did manipulate her into it, right? Like the Grandma Polly in particular, as a Deadite, really knew how to play into her emotions. But I don't know. I wasn't fully convinced of how stupid Alice was. I guess I was like, surely you're not that stupid. But I guess she was. So yeah, my favorite scene, hands down. And I also really loved Thea's choice of weapon in this, because I thought it was very clever that she grabbed a sword that had length on it. And the reason I thought that was clever is because, as we've seen, and particularly in this movie where the Deadites are so strong, I thought that made a good defense for her, because she could use that to still attack them, but from a distance, right? And even though dismembering them doesn't necessarily kill them, it gives you that 3 to 5 seconds that might be the difference between life or death, right? So I liked that choice. And like I said, the camera work was incredible. I enjoyed the tension in this scene so much. There were great performances going on. Yeah, edge of my seat the entire time for that sequence. And let's talk about Joeseph killing Alice. So, like I said, this is also where I think this is where it's one of the most potent times it's portraying its message. But I don't know if, one, everyone's going to catch on to that, and two, I feel like some people just feel like it's too ridiculous. Because Joeseph does kill Alice, not just, like, as well, in a, oh, screw you way, but brutally. Like, he smashes her face completely. And it is to protect his mum, and I've seen some people saying, oh, that's his moment of stepping up, he's protecting his mum. But is that really why he killed her? Ooh. You know, it's interesting. Obviously, I don't think he fully murdered Alice just because he was in love with Thea, but maybe a part of it was. You know, his reluctance to kill his dad is understandable. It's his dad, but at that point, you could see that his dad wasn't his dad anymore. And the same goes for Alice. She was very clearly possessed, but I couldn't believe he found it so easy to do that. I was very shocked. I wrote it in my notes, like, how did he kill her so easily? Like, did he not feel... It didn't even seem like he felt bad about it, right? And that's why I say, did part of him actually want to do that anyway? And again, I think this comes back down to the quote I began this review with, because this is in both of their cases, a relationship in which they've chosen themselves. It's not their blood relationship. This is their relationship that they chose that ultimately led to their destruction. Now, let's talk about everything else. So we're going to start with characters. And let's start, of course, with our main character, final girl, Thea. Great character, great final girl, great actress. She goes through a heck of a lot in this movie, and I think a lot is asked of the actress too. I'm not even going to attempt to say her name, but I'll put it here. I do not want to butcher her name because I think she did such a good job and she deserves the respect. But I will, I forgot to do it before filming this review, but I will Google how to say her names. So when we discuss Evil Dead Burn, I'll Google everyone's names so that when we discuss Evil Dead Burn on LCM show next Monday, I will have their names down so we can fully give them the credit they deserve. Because incredible job. Now, of course, Thea's main purpose is to carry on the theme of the domestic violence throughout the film. And of course, this is also another point that's lost a lot of people for the film, because people just find it too bleak, too dark, too depressing, and fairly, I think some people just don't feel like it was handled the best, because it is an Evil Dead movie, right? And they feel like it was almost handled for shock value, which I can absolutely see. Despite those criticisms being very, very valid, I do feel like, personally, to me, they did a good job of fleshing out Thea's character, but I will agree that I don't feel like they fleshed out her and Will's situation enough to fully give it the weight that it should have had, because it should have been a really crushing moment, in particular when she is talking to Alice later on in the film and she says, like, you knew, all of you knew, and you didn't do anything, you just watched. And it didn't quite have the impact that it should have, I think, because we never really got to see or experience that. And that's not to say that we would have to feel sorry for any of it, of course, and to know it's wrong, but I think it just would have added that extra bit of weight to it, because here's the thing, it's an Evil Dead film, right? So there were people who went into this with the preconceived notion that no matter how gory or anything it would have that sort of not taking itself too seriously element. But in trying to accomplish that, like I said, it almost doesn't take its subject matter seriously enough, but it tries to, right? But they didn't quite reach the mark they needed to with that particular story element. But I do think Thea's character was really great. I really hope she does return. I'm sure she will, since she has the dagger now. And like I said, there is some optimism in her story, right? She survives, which, as I said, good for Evil Dead standards. She has the dagger now, which of course we see can kill Deadites, and she did ultimately remove her trauma, defeat her trauma, right? She crushed its head, stabbed him with the dagger, and she is now free. And we'll talk more about some of that later on, but I really liked it. Then, let's talk about the Deadites. Because let's be honest, the Deadites are the real stars of Evil Dead. Stronger than ever? I think they are. this is quite possibly the strongest I think I've ever seen the Deadites, and I've watched all the Evil Dead films. Granted, I haven't seen the older ones in quite a while, but I do enjoy them, and obviously I've seen Ash vs Evil Dead, and I would still argue that this is quite possibly some of the strongest and most brutal we've ever seen the Deadites be. So that was really interesting for me to see. Like, as I said, they managed to boil water, they're starting fires out of nowhere, they're what's the word? When he combusts stuff, Will combust stuff just by touching it, because he's so hot from being in hell, as he should be. He should be in hell. Anyway, it was incredible. I really loved the Deadites in this movie. I thought they really did genuinely seem like a threat, even though I did kind of know that Thea was going to survive because it's Evil Dead, right? You have your final girl and she survives, as we've seen. But I think they were a really good threat in this film. I loved that they really hammered in on the physicality of the Deadites a lot as part of the horror of them. I can see the criticism, though, that they weren't as I guess the word would be taunting, because they're not sort of joking around when they're stalking them and saying these horrible things to them, right, in the other films, but they're more sort of mocking, taunting the characters psychologically, rather than really just going all in on them and just insulting them, right? Whereas this, they were more... Although, again, I think it comes back down to that saying that I expressed in the beginning, because if you think about it, who knows your deepest, darkest secrets often? Who knows really how to get to you? They've spent their entire lives with you. It's your family. So if Deadite takes over that family member, which they did also show in Evil Dead Rise and Evil Dead 2013, they're able to use much more vicious tactics emotionally to get to you, which we also see them do with Alice. So the Deadites were really, I really loved them in this movie. And of course, we get the dagger. Now, I quite like having the dagger, but I can see some people not being the biggest fan of it, because they feel either it's a bit goofy, but it's Evil Dead, or they feel like it's a bit too powerful in the sense of it does quite easily kill a Deadite. But then again, you do have to get close enough for a dagger to a Deadite to kill it, right? And that's not easy. That's a task much easier said than done, because these things are quick, strong, brutal, and as we've seen, excuse me, particularly throughout this film, they're just getting stronger. They're just getting stronger, they're getting more powers, and more angry as they are hunting for this dagger. Let's talk about Will's family. So, for me, Polly, who was played by Maud Davey, she's the grandma. She was the MVP. Even when possessed, I thought she just did such a good job. She had such funny lines. I loved the recurring joke of her thinking Alice was here to rob her. I thought that was so funny. I think it was Alice she thought was... Yes, it was, because obviously she's like, I've got what you want. And Alice... Why did the Deadite not realise that this grandma does not know what she's talking about? Because she runs off, she's like, I finally found the dagger. She knows where it is. And then she's like, oh. I did find it funny as well when Alice's Deadite version sort of bumped her on the nose. She's like, oh, there's nothing in there, is there? It's like, oh, that's so mean, but it's kind of true. There wasn't much left in there. Although she survived longer than I thought she would. And she had a good death scene. Well, death scene, I thought. I thought the gag with the stair lift was funny. And, when she turned into a Deadite, I thought her performance was even better. I was like, oh, this is great. I loved having a grandma Deadite. I just thought it was a fun idea, and it was quite good. I loved her post-credit scene as well. So we'll talk about her post-credit scene here, because compared to the second post-credit scene, it's barely anything worth mentioning, right? But it basically just confirms, after the grandma cut her leg free, she did survive. She pulls in someone off of the road, faking an injury, scratches them, so the possession continues. She's now got a new body. Yada, yada, yada. Cool post-credit scene. I was glad she's alive, but like I said, that's very much just a Evil Dead one and done post-credit scene, right? Then, in terms of the grandma, I did really like, and I think her performance really came through when she was manipulating as a Deadite Alice into letting Edgar back in. And, trying to go all along with the horror stuff. So, she's like, we could be a family again. She hugs her through the sheet. As I said, very stupid on Alice's part. I don't understand how she didn't sort of snap out of it, but I guess by that point she was just so broken, right? But it was interesting. And I think her performance really shined through. I couldn't believe she actually let Edgar back in. That was shocking. And so with gore, I can handle a decent amount of gore. I will sometimes like squeeze, be like, ew, but I can genuinely handle it. But I do not like spit. Spit and sort of mouth. That's like one of my main things. That, eyes and ears, I'm like, no, I don't want to watch that. And obviously, when she kissed Edgar and all the blood was. They were kissing. Gross. I hated it, but it was very evil dead. That was like, okay, you guys got me. It's taken a while, but you guys got something that made me want to look away. There was actually one scene I did fully look away and like squeal, and that was it was the ear. It was when Thea had to pull out the thing from her ear, and I was like, nope, covering my eyes. So yes, she manipulated her own daughter, and I thought it was a really great performance from her in that moment. And I could see partly how how Alice started falling for it, but then, like I said, I did think she was a bit daft by the end of it. Now, as for Susan, she's played by she's played by Tandy Wright, and I really liked her performance. I found it interesting that it's revealed that she did know about the occult, and of course, it's revealed that the granddad was part of the Circle of Wise Men. Interesting that she had such a disapproving view of it. And I do wonder, because we don't really establish it much, but I wonder if perhaps the granddad did something in his pursuit of the dagger or something that really traumatized Alice to the point that she was like, she's like, he's a horrible man. I don't want anything to do with any of this stuff. So that to me indicates that she may have had some type of experience in the past with either Deadites or something of the occult that scared her enough to almost not even want to acknowledge her. I guess it was her dad's existence. Interesting. But yeah, great performance. I loved her performance at Will's funeral as well. I loved the reaction everyone had when Thea was like, oh, I didn't prepare a speech. And they were just like, oh, okay. But honestly, I guess, well, at the time, we don't know that they knew about the reality of Thea's and Will's relationship, but as if they really thought she was going to get up there and cry about that man. Although she was very upset about it, of course, but yeah. Then we're going to talk about Edgar. I really liked Edgar, but I've seen some people say that he was one of their least favourite parts of this movie, and I particularly saw, I believe it was Mark Commode, great reviewer by the way, I love Mark Commode's reviews, so don't feel like this is an insult to him at all. We all have our different opinions. He didn't like the movie, that's perfectly fine. But he didn't like in particular the scene where Edgar is, trying to again, I'm trying to be careful of the words I use, because even though I'm not monetized, I don't want to get like striked on YouTube, but he's injuring himself, right? And basically he's just proving the point, as well as just messing with people, that they're stronger than ever and you're not going to kill him just by shooting him, right? I can understand why people felt like it was going too far at this point. Also, it does go quite far, and in particular, a lot of, I'd say, the really gross out moments. And it's funny, that scene and the dog scene all involve Edgar, so it sort of makes sense that Edgar is people's least favourite from the film, apart from Joeseph. Because, he's sort of the conduit for a lot of the worst parts of the film in many people's eyes. But I really enjoyed his performance, and in particular, one of my favourite scenes with him and in the whole film was when the Deadites made him think that Will was still alive in the coffin. That was such a menace of them. I honestly, in my chair, just went, oh, in the cinema, like, that's harsh, that's rough. That was probably, in my opinion, one of the harshest things in the entire film, was making him believe that just for that split moment, his son might be alive and actually in the coffin, and he actually gets to him as well, right? He gets to the coffin, and then it's a burning hand. Oh, that was just that got me. I was like, that's brutal. And that's where the possession starts. I liked the I'm not sure what you'd call his job, but the mortuary assistant, I guess, whoever he was great. I thought he did a really good job with his little scene. And again, I thought he was funny. So to me, there was comedy in it because it was very absurd. It was very ridiculous and over the top. You know, this big flaming demon coming out of this really pristine as well, like all white, pristine, clean room. Right? That it was. I enjoyed it. I saw the entertainment in it, but I can understand why people thought it was too far. Now, speaking of sons, let's talk about Joeseph. I did not like this character. Props to the actor, because it's very much deliberately that I think people aren't supposed to like his character and feel like he is just a wuss, basically. But he never really steps up. Throughout the entire movie, the only time he really steps up, as we've said, is when he eventually kills Alice. But even then, that's not him stepping up. As I said, I believe that's something he wanted to do regardless in the situation, right? Well, obviously not beforehand. But, you know, once things had reached that level and he had the opportunity to kill her, he took it very, very quickly, unlike he did earlier in the film. So that was interesting. As I said, he was clearly in love with Thea. I think Thea might have had feelings for him as well, but I'm not too sure. She might have just seen comfort in him because he wasn't like Will, right? He was very calming. He was quite thoughtful. That was interesting. Also, is it just me, or did you guys feel like when Joeseph used the pen thing that Will got him, that seemed like they were almost trying to make us feel like there was some good in Will, but it didn't work. I was like, I still hate this guy, and I almost wish you didn't do this, because why should anything this man Will gave to anyone be positive? And, you know, he's still, you know, he comes back in the end and you see he's evil. Also, I'll say the actor who played Joeseph, I don't know if this was just me, but he reminded me of Anton Yelchin a few times throughout the movie, in a good way. I was like, he kind of looks and has the same vibe as Anton Yelchin did. And I really loved Anton Yelchin. It was very sad when he passed away, of course. He was, of course, on Star Trek. He was in a lot of different films. He was also in a really underrated horror film called Green Room. Kind of horror film. It's more of a thriller, but there is gore and stuff in it. Really great film, that one. Very intense, very intense. And this would have definitely been a movie that Anton Yelchin, if he was alive today, would have done. He would have 100% been playing Joeseph, and probably made him still likable, even though he was such a coward. But, like, that's no fault of the actor. I think he was just given a shitty character to play, right? Like, the character was intentionally a shitty person. So he did a good job doing that. So props to the actor. Also, of course, like I said, he is the one who was playing the tapes from Evil Dead Rise at the beginning of the film. So you could argue he's the one who unearthed the dagger. So he is responsible, essentially, for the entire movie. Just gets worse and worse. I do not like this man. I'm glad he's dead. I think he died, right? As I said, it was such a horror endurance test. You sort of get it all blurred. And you're like, was that? Am I remembering that? Or am I just thinking they did that because the movie was so brutal, so it would have made sense that they killed him? I'm pretty sure they did kill him. Pardon me. So, with the characters out of the way, let's talk about some of the other elements for me that worked about the film, and some elements that did not. Starting with a medium one, let's talk about the third act, the final act, Will's return and chase with Thea, and pretty much from there. Now, like I said, because they didn't quite flesh out Will and Thea's relationship enough throughout the film for me, I didn't quite feel the gravity of the threat of Will, because partly I felt like Thea was going to survive anyway, and then also I just didn't quite feel like he was as big of a threat as they were trying to make him out to be. But I will give them credit. The shot when he returns of the camera rolling up and he's coming out of the House of Flames was an incredible shot. Incredible shot. It was beautiful. Hang it in the Louvre. I loved that. But, you know, we only really ever see flashbacks of their relationship, and they're very brief. And part of that, I guess, is deliberate, and also they only have so much time, right? But it was a shame to me that it didn't quite hit as much as I think it could have. But it still hit for me. I still thought it was very effective. And I thought there were some really effective visuals in the entire third act. You know, we get that really great visual of Thea running away through the woods with the classic Evil Dead red sky. That was an excellent visual as well. Also, and this is why I said I was going to shout out Philip Lozano, the cinematographer, later on, because another one of my favourite visuals in the film comes in this third act, which is where Thea is hiding from Will in the construction site, and the lights of the construction vehicles are showing Will moving towards her as a shadow, right? And then it disappears, and you're like, oh no! Great scene. I thought that visual was perfect. I really, really loved it. Also, like I said, they made use of the environment in that construction site. Really well done. You know, it's almost Final Destination-esque in the way Evil Dead, I don't know if you guys do this, but when we're in different locations and you know horror's going to start, you sort of look for, at least I do, the objects in the environment and the room that are probably going to be used, right? And they do some foreshadowing with stuff every now and then, of course, but there is also just that general vibe, which is similar to Final Destination when you're constantly wondering what's going to be the thing that kills this person. It's the same with this, which I really liked. I really, really enjoyed that element of it, and I think it was good that they used the environment so well. Of course, we have the tar pit in this third act, and I did like this. I liked the tar pit scene. Again, it didn't quite... When she eventually kills Will, it didn't quite land as I think they wanted it to. So that's why it's in like the medium category, right? But it was cool. I enjoyed it. I thought the tar pit was a nice touch. Interesting. I thought she was gonna like at least get burnt by it a little bit, but she does get out of it pretty quickly. Great visual though. Really great visuals. Great scene. Very tense. I did enjoy the third act, and it did feel like the movie itself started to sort of really come to life during this third act. But of course, you know, you did have to get through the first two acts to get there, and some people just really did not like the stuff that was present in the first two acts. So of course, a lot of the stuff in the third act just does not land for them. Whereas where I liked the first two acts, it did land for me. I will also say one thing I have appreciated about Evil Dead 2013, Rise, and now Burn. They put a lot more effort into these movies, in my opinion, than they would even need to. In terms of visuals, although I guess that can be argued with for this movie, some people don't like the colour palette. I like the colour palette, and I think, in particular, for the middle part of the film, it adds to the almost Resident Evil 7 Biohazard vibe of the film. But I can see why people don't like it, but they do put effort into it. They put effort into the colours, they put effort into the camera work, they put effort into the performances. They don't need to put as much effort into it as they do, and I'm always so thankful that they do. So really big, again, shout out to not only the entire cast, but the director, Sebastian, and the cinematographer. They just did such a good job with this movie, in my opinion. I really loved it. One thing that definitely I do agree with that doesn't work as well is the pacing. Some people do feel like the middle of this movie in particular is a bit of a chore at times, because it sort of ramps up to an 11 and then goes straight back down to like a 2 or a 3 for a while, until everything sort of kicks off with the house chase scene, like I said, which was my favourite sequence of the film. I do think in general the pacing was quite well done. I never found myself bored or anything, or wondering is this movie over yet, but I will say that I think particularly if you've not been enjoying it, you will reach your threshold within probably the first hour and 15 minutes of this film. Particularly if the type of horror it's going for is not for you. I don't know if you'll make it all the way through it, because it's a lot. It's a lot. Like I said, it's a horror endurance test to a certain degree. A lot of messed up stuff happens, but even then, the most messed up stuff, I would say, apart from the dog scene, happens in the latter half of the film. So by that point, if you've already checked out, which I feel like a lot of people did, I think that's also contributing to the negative reviews, because of course by that point they just wanted the film to be over. Comedy wise, as I said, I did find somewhat comedic enjoyment out of the film, but not from the horror, but in like the grandma character, for example. I thought she was quite funny. There was that gag with the funeral with the construction noise, which that's quite funny. And of course, the Deadites say such out of pocket stuff that sometimes you just laugh at it. But I can see it's interesting, you know. We talk about fractured fan bases with DC, Star Wars. Evil Dead's sort of beginning to have that problem as well, because there seems to be a very big divide that's getting wider and wider between fans of the older films that had the more camp vibe and fans of the newer films who are enjoying the over-the-top horror aspect. I fall in the middle, just personally. I enjoy both. As long as it's a good movie, in my opinion, I'm happy. And I do feel this is a good movie. Very good movie, in fact. And then also, for me, part of my entertainment and enjoyment of the newest Evil Dead movies comes from seeing if I can take it, right? How much of this movie can I actually watch without covering my eyes or looking away from the screen? And I was surprised I think I did quite well with this film. There were, like I said, a few moments I was like, I can't do it. But for the most part, I think I was very impressed with myself with this film. But I mean, I feel like genuinely, even though I've talked about how fake it was, Terrifier 2 was so gory to me. It was one of the goriest films I've ever seen, that it sort of desensitized me to a lot of gore going forward. I was just like, well, at least it's not that scene. Right? But there's some messed up stuff in here. And like I said, I did wince every now and then, but I think I kept my cool enough. And I didn't... One jump scare in particular, I will say one jump scare really got me. I can't remember quite when it was, but I think it was in the house chase. And it was something so stupid. If I remember, it was like the grandma comes out of the floor or something and screams, and it got me. And I was like, oh, very scary. Now, also, let's talk about the other biggest thing that people did not like about this movie, which is the second post-credit scene. Oh, here we go. Right. So there's a few things that I think have gone into the controversy behind this post-credit scene. The first being that it does raise a lot of questions, not just from a lore perspective, but from just the perspective of where this franchise is going in general. So what essentially happens is the owner, I think she's the owner of the crematorium I think it's a crematorium as well. I'm not sure. We don't really get it established. But the owner of the place where they held Will's funeral, where they cremated him, etc., is with what I assume is... to me, it really did look like the daughter from Evil Dead Rise, but I could be wrong, so I don't want to say for sure it was. But I'm pretty sure it was. And even if it wasn't, still, really great actress. Really good scene, in my opinion. So we see the mum sort of appearing in the mirror. She touches the mirror, and that was a great scene as well. I love the visual of it. And then the mum appears behind her, but she snaps her neck. So, you know, they kill a child, which is very controversial in horror. And also for a post-credits scene, interesting choice, right? And she says, Mummy's back, which I loved. I loved the actress who played her... I think her name was Alice in Evil Dead Rise. It was so good. I really liked her reintroduction. But of course, people have lots of questions around it. And also, my thought is it too important of a scene to have been a post-credit scene? Because also, bear in mind, they didn't show this scene to critics before, for the press screenings. They didn't show this scene, apparently. They only showed the first credit scene. So that also means a lot of critics' reviews didn't even see this part of the film, and arguably one of the most controversial parts of the film. But I guess they didn't want it spoiled. I guess they really didn't want the spoiler to get out there, because they're particularly, I think, not only setting up Evil Dead Wrath, but of course setting up whatever the sequel to this movie will be. Was it too far to kill a child? Here's the thing, horror and what's going too far is very subjective, and this is what I'm going to say, because there's certain debates into horror whether or not something should be so disturbing that you don't want to watch it. I like to follow, if you watch a channel called Sarah, Possessed by Horror, she has a really nice mantra that I try to keep with horror, because there was a time when after watching so much horror, I stopped watching it for a while, for years, because I just couldn't hack it. It was affecting my mental health. But eventually I winged my way back on, and I'm so glad I did, because I do just love the genre so much. But you do reach a limit, and I think what I would say is just, you generally know your limits of what you can and can't handle, right? You know what's gonna upset you too much, what sort of too far for you. So my advice would be, if any form of hurting an animal, hurting a child, or domestic violence themes is too much for you, don't watch the film. I don't think you're going to enjoy it. If you're someone who feels up to the challenge despite you having those limits, maybe watch it, but I'd maybe wait to watch it at home, because then if it does get too much for you, you can pause it, you can go take a break, or you can even fast forward that specific scene. Or maybe just have a joint while watching it. You know, that might make it a bit of an easier watching experience. But you know what I mean. I feel like it's important to know your limits with horror, which I do now. And that's something I do exercise. If I hear about, so for example, Bring Her Back. I've heard so many good things about Bring Her Back, and I really would love to watch that movie, but I just know, based on what it's about, based on what happens in it, I could never watch that film. Never watch that film. I would never recover from it. So, you know, it's good to know your limits with horror. And I would say, because some people would argue that's going against the point of horror, I don't think it is. I think it's perfectly okay to have your limits with horror. And I think it's perfectly fine if Evil Dead Burn hits that limit for you. Because everyone has their own tastes, their own feelings, their own experiences with stuff that movies tackle. So honestly, if you are worried but you think, oh, I'm not a horror fan if I don't see Evil Dead Burn, that's not true at all. You are still a horror fan whether you can only handle movies like Mars Attacks, I don't know, right? Or whether you watch the absolute goriest, most real stuff of all time. It's all horror at the end of the day, and you do not have to force yourself to watch something that is going to genuinely mentally affect you in a way that you might not recover from, technically, in a way, right? You just don't need to do it to yourself. It's fine. You can skip it. Or as I said, if you're still curious about it, even though those triggers that I mentioned are your triggers, maybe check it out, watch it on streaming, or you can always do, I don't tend to do it just because it does sometimes spoil stuff, but you can check out an app/website called Does the Dog Die, and they have a bunch of anything that could be too much for you, pretty much, that you might not like in a movie. They let you know what's in it. It can be sometimes difficult to find the exact movie you're looking for with horror, because obviously there's so many really low budget films, independent films, etc. But for the most part, it works quite well, and that's how I'm sometimes able to decide I'm not going to watch this, or I am going to give this a shot. Yes, overall, I just want to really emphasize that there is nothing wrong with liking Evil Dead Burn, and there is nothing wrong with disliking Evil Dead Burn as a horror fan. If it is too much for you, that does not make you any less of a horror fan than someone who loves it, and vice versa. Okay? So just please bear that in mind, because there's such a discourse around the meanness of the film and everything. I feel like people can easily get pulled into very blanket statements of, well, you're terrible because you like this film, or you're an idiot because you don't like the film, and none of it's true. A horror fan is a horror fan, however they come. Okay. Future of the Evil Dead franchise. I know this has been a long video. If you're still with me, I mean, thank you so much. So we're going to speed it up now. We're just going to quickly go through what I think the future of the Evil Dead franchise has in store, overall thoughts, and then our score. So, first of all, of course, we have Evil Dead Wrath coming out, which is a prequel set before any of the Evil Dead films. I do think this is going to set up a lot of the modern day stuff that has happened. I think we're going to get some good context. I hope we see some of the Circle of Wise Men in that. So, it's such a daft name. Oh, is it? I'd be interested to know if anyone can let me know if that's actually like a real thing in the occult, because it's such a silly name. But I love it. Evil Dead. And of course, they are setting up the sequel to Evil Dead Burn, Evil Dead Doomsday. No. No, but I do think we're going to see Mia come back. I think we'll see Thea come back because she, of course, has the dagger now. Although I do not know how she is going to explain this situation. That's something I've always thought, even in Evil Dead 2013. How the heck can you explain what has just happened? Rise, they could somewhat explain, right? Because one, there was CCTV in the apartment. Two, there was an earthquake beforehand, and some of the injuries could perhaps be mistaken for just injury in the earthquake, things like that. I don't know how Thea is ever going to explain how she went to this family's house that already did not like her, and her abusive family's house, boyfriend's family's house no less, and they all ended up massacred, and she survived. Right? So, one other note I want to make for Evil Dead, and I really hope someone shares this, because get Indy Navarrete as a Deadite for an Evil Dead movie immediately. I don't care if you have to go and film something new for Evil Dead Wrath. No, I'm joking. But for the sequel to this, get her on this film. I genuinely believe she would have the potential to be the best Deadite performance we've ever seen. And I honestly think she would maybe be good enough to bridge that gap, because she's really good, as we've seen in an Obsession, of mixing wacky, what the fuck stuff with genuine horror, that she might be able to start bridging that gap a little bit more between original Evil Dead fans and new Evil Dead fans. Give her a call. Give her a call. I know she's probably going to be quite expensive these days because Obsession makes so much money, but she's worth the money. I think she would really, really, really be an incredible choice for a Deadite. So overall thoughts. This has been a long video. I do apologise. Thank you so much if you've bared with me all this time. Overall, I really, really loved this film. I did really love this film. I don't know if it's quite my favourite horror movie of the year, which I was expecting it to be, which is a shame. And like I said, I absolutely understand many people's criticisms with the film, and I do agree with some of them. But for me personally, I enjoyed it as almost a litmus test. No, wrong word. Endurance test. Obsession is the one that's a litmus test, and surprising amount of people are failing. I'm not gonna talk about other YouTubers. I don't like to, but you know who I'm talking about. Yeah, I really loved this movie. I think it was a good horror endurance test. I think I did quite well with it. As you can see, I liked the film, and many people it was too much for. And I'm surprised. I saw people on my timeline who I've followed for a while who didn't like it, and I was shocked because I've seen some of the movies they've watched and enjoyed, and I'm like, you really thought this was worse than this? Like, that's incredible. Good on Evil Dead Burn, I guess. They accomplished their goal. They wanted to shock, and they shocked. Do I think that the controversy will hurt the film? I don't know if it will. I think it could go either way, because I think the controversy could almost, particularly because horror's having such a moment right now, I think it could fuel the film a bit more, and more people might check it out and be like, well, could it really be this bad, right? That's something that Terrifier became very popular for, was, pardon me, particularly after Terrifier 2 did surprisingly well at the box office as well. People started checking it out because more conversation was happening around it. They were like, is it really that gory? Is this really worth it? What the heck is this thing? And people started to like it. And I would argue that Art the Clown, I have a little, I don't know if you can quite see him. He's sort of next to the Hot Wheels. I have a little Art the Clown figure that my dad got me, which I love. He's sort of a horror icon now. And I feel like Deadites are absolutely a horror icon, but this franchise in particular produces a lot of horror icons, which is very interesting. And I think the controversy could help the film. Or people could be like, there ain't no way I'm watching this, and it could tank. Especially because there are a portion of even horror and Evil Dead fans who don't like the film. So that could impact it. But overall, I do think the film will do moderately well. I don't know if it will come in and it's tracking. I believe it was tracking for 40 million, which was ambitious to begin with. And I think with the current reaction to the movie from horror fans, I don't know if it will quite match that. Or maybe all this controversy, as I said, is about to propel it into the next Backrooms or Obsession. Time will tell. We'll be discussing it on Monday with my LCM show, which, if you don't know, is a weekly show I do breaking down the box office and the newest horror movies coming out and other movies. We don't just talk about horror here, but we talk about it a lot. We love horror. So let's get to scores. So, I was quite shocked when I went on Letterboxd and saw it only has a 3.5 out of 5 on Letterboxd. That was a surprise. That's a shame. Although that's not a bad score, right? That means a decent amount of people liked it. And, of course, it did start... it started at 90% in the 90s on Rotten Tomatoes, but, of course, as more people have seen it, it is, at the time of filming, on Saturday. So this is, I believe, 2 days after release. Okay, I saw it on opening night. It's at 72% on Rotten Tomatoes. So that's not great. That's not great. I wonder if it will be up or down by the time Monday rolls around. We'll talk about its Rotten Tomatoes score, and we're going to talk about its other scores as well in the LCM show. I would include IMDb scores, but IMDb is just... it's the equivalent of using Wikipedia as your source, right? Like, I'm not going to use IMDb scores to give weight or merit to anything. So we use Letterboxd and RT, so 3.5 out of 5 on Letterboxd, 72% on Rotten Tomatoes. My score, out of 10, I give it a 9. A really, really solid 9. I know some people are very shocked at this. Some people might be like, absolutely, or why isn't it higher? Particularly because Evil Dead Rise, I think I did give a 10. And I think I gave Evil Dead 2013 a 10. But this one, as I said, it has flaws. It has flaws, it has problems, it has pacing issues, and it doesn't quite have the impact I think it wanted it to have. But overall, I love this film. I can't wait for it to come out on Blu-ray. This steelbook looks incredible. I can't wait to get that. That looks great. And yeah, I highly recommend it, but as I said, know your limits. If anything I've talked about in this review, and for some reason you've used a spoiler review, because I could see why you might do to see what actually happens, to decide whether you're going to be okay with this movie. If what I've talked about, you're like, I don't know if I can do it, just wait for streaming. It's not going to be worth your time if you're just going to have a horrible experience. But if you're like, this sounds awesome, go check it out. Particularly in cinemas with a good crowd, I think you'll have a very good time. So, that was my Evil Dead Burn spoiler review. What did you think of the movie? Let me know your favourite moments down below. Did it go too far for you? And please know, the comment section is a safe space for you. If anyone starts being rude to anyone in the comments about their opinions, you know, I'll just delete the comment. We don't have to worry about that. Don't feel like you're going to get judged for being a horror fan who found it too much, or vice versa, okay? I just want to know if you were able to, you know, make it through. Were you able to make the endurance test? Alright, thank you so much for checking out my review. Thank you so much for... Alright, thank you so much for watching. I'll be posting more reviews on this channel every week, so be sure to like and subscribe for more. And of course, come and check us out on Monday for the LCM show, where we'll be discussing Evil Dead's box office. Alright, thank you so much for watching. Bye-bye.